Hey guys, HackerSploit here, back again with another video. Welcome back to the Red Team series. In this video, we're going to be getting a formal, proper introduction to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So in the previous video, when we were going over the various Red Team frameworks and methodologies, like again, the attack framework, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I should say, the cyber kill chain, and the unified kill chain, I introduced you to the attack framework and, how it's typically used for red team operations. But I know that that must have confused you a little bit. And that's why we're going to be, now taking a look at the attack framework, not just getting an introduction to it and understanding what it is, but also how it is used by red teamers or during red team operations. With that being said, let's get started. So we'll switch over from the slides once I've given you the introduction onto the attack framework website. But you may be asking yourself, if this is your first time hearing about the attack framework, you may be asking yourself, what is the MITRE ATT&CK framework? Or if you have heard of it before, you might be a little bit confused about it. And that's what I'm going to try and resolve, or at least I'm going to try and answer that question in a very contextualized format. So the MITRE ATT&CK framework is a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics and techniques based on real-world threats and threat actors, more specifically APT groups, right? So just pay attention to that description. So globally accessible, what does that mean? It means it's open, it's free to use. You don't need to pay anything. You don't need to register an account. Great. Second word or words are knowledge base. All right. If you think about what a knowledge base is, and how knowledge bases are used, that should give you a better understanding of what the attack framework is or how it can be used. So when I say knowledge base as a red teamer, just think of it as a reference. Just think of it as a reference or documentation on all publicly disclosed attacks or breaches by APT groups that have been classified against or have been classified in or by the MITRE ATT&CK team. And this is all organized through the use of the attack framework itself and all the tactics, techniques, and procedures that encapsulate it. So it was essentially developed to improve the understanding of how cyber attacks are performed. Now, attack, which is an obvious abbreviation, is an abbreviation for adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge, right? And the MITRE ATT&CK framework is typically employed or used as a baseline and model for adversarial behavior and highlights the various phases of an adversary or the threat attack lifecycle, what software the attackers employ, and more importantly, what operating systems or what type of environments they target. It is mostly used by red and or blue teamers to plan, implement, and orchestrate engagements based on specific threat actors or APTs, and that's specifically in the case of adversary emulation or simulation. Now, one common misnomer is that, the attack framework is really only useful for the red team or if you're offensive minded. However, the blue team, and I can say this from experience, is also a valuable resource for blue teamers or SOC analysts as it details the various TTPs used by a specific threat actor and provides companies or blue teams with valuable cyber threat intelligence that can consequently be used to implement defenses and mitigations for specific techniques. So let's say, we'll actually be taking a look at a practical demo in a second, and I'll use some examples to help explain how it can be used. So don't worry if it's still confusing. Now, the MITRE ATT&CK framework categorizes adversarial techniques into a collection of tactics that are further organized into techniques, sub-techniques, and procedures, which is where we get the abbreviated term TTPs. So whenever I refer to TTPs, just know that it's in relation to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and generally speaking represents, the tactics, techniques, and, sub-techniques and procedures of an adversary. Or if you're performing a red team operation, it represents the TTPs that you're going to be implementing, during the red team operation. And by this point, you can sort of understand how and why the attack framework is used by red teamers specifically. So you can see I've just added the screenshot here of the attack framework, and the tactics represent each phase, of an adversary's or a red team operation. Let's just put it in that context. So this represents all the phases that you typically see, or you typically go through during a red team operation. Now, remember, not every red team operation or not every attacker or adversary or APT group, will follow this sequentially, or will actually, utilize any, or will actually utilize all of these tactics. So, for example, if I'm planning a red team operation, I'll obviously, specify or use this as a guideline to essentially guide me in planning the operation. So I'm keeping aside adversary emulation, or where we are looking at an APT group's TTPs, and I'm now looking at it from the perspective of just, planning a red team operation. So for example, I could say during the recon phase, we want to perform, some phishing for information. We want to perform some active scanning. And then during resource development, we need to acquire some infrastructure for our C2, communication channels or infrastructure. We probably want to obtain some capabilities. What that means is, get some malware or develop some payloads that, can evade, antivirus or evade detection by antiviruses. And then initial access, we're going to target the company's public-facing applications or servers. And we know that they have a couple of exposed external remote services that we probably want to target. For this one, we're not really going to be performing any phishing. So in terms of execution, the command and scripting interpreter we're going to be using, made or in very close conjunction to our command and control infrastructure or framework, I should say, is, let's say, something like PowerShell. You get the idea. What are we going to do for privilege escalation? So it just acts as a guideline, or provides you with a guideline for planning that you can then adhere to or use again as a guideline when you actually when you're orchestrating the operation. Because I realize obviously that you can define your activities beforehand as best as you want, or as accurately as you think you are, or as accurately as you think you're doing. But once you're performing the red team operation, there's obviously going to be some changes, and the attack navigator is more so, or more importantly, the tool that will again tie all of these, or will essentially allow you to operationalize the MITRE ATT&CK framework for red team operations. So one of the really awesome aspects of the attack framework is that it breaks down TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures according to specific environments. So you can see it has TTPs for enterprise environments. You can also limit it just to Windows environments or Windows operating systems, the Mac or the macOS operating system. So let's say you're targeting a Windows environment. Well, you can limit the TTPs to just show those TTPs relevant, for Windows or with the Windows operating system. You can do that for Linux, the cloud, network, containers, and there's also something again really cool. You also have the matrix for mobile environments. So Android, iOS TTPs, and again also really cool, you also have the industrial control systems or ICS environments. And in that case, obviously your TTPs or the TTPs will change, and that's why it has this sorting. So enterprise just refers to enterprise environment. So just think of it as representing the TTPs relevant to an enterprise environment. So small, medium, large organization, so on and so forth. Now diving a little bit deeper into tactics, techniques, and procedures, which again can be abbreviated or is abbreviated as TTP. Or TTPs, I should say. What are tactics? What are techniques? And what are procedures? Well, if we take a look at this screenshot here, that again I took from the MITRE ATT&CK framework website, you can see that initial access is a tactic. The techniques are listed under the tactic, and then some techniques also have sub-techniques. So phishing is obviously a very general term, or can be thought of as a very wide technique in terms of, the fact that phishing is, you probably ask yourself, well, what type of phishing? And that's what sub-techniques address. So you can see the sub-technique for the phishing technique, the sub-techniques for the phishing techniques are spear phishing attachments, spear phishing links, or spear phishing via service. So describing it a little bit better now, tactics categorize each step of the adversary's attack methodology, or the red team, the red teamer's attack methodology. Tactics represent the adversary's tactical goal or objective. And techniques are used to outline how each tactic is orchestrated. So techniques essentially describe actions taken by adversaries to achieve their objective. So if our objective is initial access, a technique essentially outlines the various techniques. Apologies for the redundancy, but it outlines the techniques and sub-techniques that can be used to achieve your objective, which is initial access. So your techniques just tell you or give you the different ways that you can achieve initial access in this case. And the sub-techniques are essentially an implementation of a specific technique that, again, requires a bit more detail or is multifaceted. So phishing is multifaceted in that you can perform phishing through the form of a spear phishing attachment, a link, via service, so on and so forth. Now, the procedures aspect is where a lot of people, when we talk about procedures, this is where a lot of people get confused, because again, I've taught the MITRE ATT&CK framework many times. But for now, just think of it, a procedure as an implementation of a technique or sub-technique. Now, as a red teamer, this may not be that interesting to you at first glance. And the procedure or the procedures aspect of the MITRE ATT&CK framework is where it starts becoming a knowledge base. Now, if you remember when I was introducing it to you, it was used, the MITRE ATT&CK framework was created to provide clarity and an understanding of how what attackers do, the actions they take, so on and so forth. So procedures essentially give you examples of, let's say, how specific APT groups performed or executed a particular technique. So if I clicked on, spear phishing attachment and you take a look at procedures, it's actually quite helpful if you go through it, because it'll tell you, what APT groups or threat groups or adversaries have used this specific technique or sub-technique, and more importantly, how they implemented it or how they performed it in order to obtain initial access. So just closing off the theoretical section of this video, why should you use the attack framework, or why am I spending all this time explaining it to you? And this will become apparent as we progress within this series and we get into adversary emulation, AD pen testing, etc. But why should you use it? Well, firstly, it provides attackers and defenders with a common knowledge base of adversarial behavior based on behavioral analysis of attacks and threat campaigns that were publicly disclosed. So when you talk about cyber threat intelligence and, threat intelligence analysts that are analyzing, let's say, breaches by certain APT groups, they'll use something like the attack framework, or not something like, they will use the attack framework to say, okay, it looks like, this particular APT group gained access through here, and they'll say, okay, let's select that there. And then you build a profile, or they're able to build a profile, and they use the attack framework as a way to organize or to understand what exactly that particular threat actor or APT group did. Moving forward or moving on, it also organizes and categorizes. Categorizes, and contextualizes adversarial behavior based on the different phases of the attack lifecycle. And as a red teamer, you're really focused on the lifecycle or the tactics, because they sort of give you a structured way of approaching a red team operation and ensuring that, again, you're able not only to understand the different phases that you're likely to go through during the operation, but also perform some planning. More importantly, it utilizes common and standardized nomenclature when referencing TTPs and APT groups, as well as other elements, and it's also frequently updated. So This is very important. The third point here where, I'm referencing the fact that it utilizes a common and standardized nomenclature. What do I mean by that? Well, every tactic, technique or sub-technique has a unique ID or identifier that allows me to tell a blue teamer or a defender, hey, you guys didn't do too well at detecting, let's say, T1058. And just saying that, again, it doesn't matter whether they know what that technique or what that ID is referring to specifically. They can easily take that ID and search for it on the MITRE ATT&CK framework website and know exactly what I'm talking about. So it creates this shared language, or provides for this standardized nomenclature that allows us as red teamers to bridge the gap in terms of communicating stuff effectively with the blue team. And this will become, or will make a lot more sense in the next video when we'll be taking a look at the MITRE ATT&CK navigator. So now that we've got this, proper understanding, or I should say, formal understanding of the MITRE ATT&CK framework and how it correlates, how it relates to red team operations, I'm now going to switch over into my browser and we can go through the MITRE ATT&CK website, and you'll actually see what I was explaining or trying to explain in the slide. So just give me a second and I'll be back in just a second, no pun intended. All right, so I'm back in my web browser, and I'm currently on the MITRE ATT&CK framework website, which is accessible via the URL attack.mitre.org, or you can just search for it on Google. Now, when you visit the ATT&CK framework website for the first time, it looks a little bit confusing. You probably understand what all of this means now. Attack matrix for enterprise. Enterprise is a matrix. It's a matrix, I should say, which represents the TTPs that are relevant to enterprise environments. And it essentially displays, the tactics and each of the techniques, and allows you to expand, each of the techniques and list out the sub-techniques if they do have one. But you can play through this, and if you hover over any, let's say you hover over a tactic like defense evasion, this is the common language or the nomenclature I was referring to, the standardized nomenclature. You can see that it actually tells you the ID of that tactic. And if I hover over a technique within a specific tactic, it also gives me the ID of that technique. So T1548. So that means if I tell you T1548, you can immediately either search for it manually by hovering over every technique or sub-technique, or you can click on this the search button and say T1548, and you can see there we are. Now it'll probably bring up, let me make sure that's correct. So T1548 abuse elevation control mechanism, there we are. So T1548, there we are, abuse elevation control mechanism. And this is really powerful, especially if you're dealing with the blue team. They can immediately click on that technique here, and in this case I'm looking at it from the perspective of a defender, so they can see what you're referring to. So let's say I tell, or I communicate to the blue team that, hey, you guys didn't do so well in detecting abusing the elevation control mechanism on Windows. So for example, UAC on Windows. So then they can go as defenders and take a look at the mitigations, which is something that not a lot of people know, but it actually tells you how you can mitigate abuse of elevation control mechanisms. If you take a look at the sub-techniques, you can now dive into the operating specific techniques, or the techniques that are operating system specific, and you can take a look at those more granular mitigations. But the other cool thing, and again I'm looking at this from the perspective of a defender, is it also provides you with detections or ways you can detect this, that you can integrate into your detection rigs or your defensive security solutions or your SIEMs to create either alerts, so on and so forth. So you can see when we talk about user account, or let's see one that makes sense here. In fact, if I go into Let's see some of the, there we are, bypass user account control. This is relevant to Windows. Now, the procedure examples give you examples of how, let's say, APT29 bypassed UAC. So you can click on the references there, but it essentially tells you that, hey, in terms of who used this technique or sub-technique, APT29 is a group that actually did it. And you can click on the references there to actually, this will take you to some threat intelligence reports that'll explain to you, or that'll show you exactly how APT29 was able to elevate their privileges or by, perform evade defenses by, again, leveraging or abusing UAC. So you can see this is just one here. Let's see where that is highlighted. And just a moment. Let's see where UAC was bypassed. They talk about this here. Let's see if we can find this mentioned specifically. And of course, you can go through all of the other, this is by Mandiant. Actually, I probably should have explained or understood. So there we are, noisy breach, Mandiant. This looks like an analysis of, let's see here. There we are, details of massive intrusion by the Russian APT group APT29, also known as Cozy Bear, as I like to refer to it. You can see, fun fact, this was APT29. But anyway, you can go through all these threat intelligence reports or analysis reports by, different, really juggernauts in the cybersecurity world like Mandiant, to understand how, APT29, abused elevation control mechanisms. In this case, it looks like it was, most likely done on Windows. So this is abusing Kerberos tickets there. It also provides some really cool intel or info on how you can, you can mitigate these attacks. But let's see. I didn't see any reference to that. Just a moment, and apologies if I'm going on a tangent here. Let's see. This is the response, indicators of compromise, challenge 4, advanced attack techniques. There we are. Looks like PowerShell scripts like invoke, mimikatz, evaded AV detection. Increase PowerShell visibility. I don't see any reference to that specifically yet, I should say. Let me just find it. Okay, so couldn't find anything there, but if I click on the group here, APT29 as a group, and we take a look at the campaigns, you can take a look at the, again, campaigns that we know of, right? But we can take a look at the techniques used. More importantly, if I take a look at this, that'll just take me to that reference. You can see the software that they used or malware that they used. So for example, they used, what did they use for the C2 framework? They used Bloodhound for AD enumeration. It looks like Cobalt Strike. They've used that quite a bit. But there we are. So the references give you great analysis reports or, CTI reports. So if I say, we can click on any of these here. Let's see. Let me pick one by Mandiant. No, I don't want Mandiant. I want one technical one. Let's see this here. Not found. So I probably need to check something else. FireEye Labs. Symantec is quite good with their reports. And don't worry if you're still new to APT groups and threat intelligence, I'll probably make a video on that. Hold on a second. Looks like that just points to a closed forum, but let me open this up. So if you're not familiar, APT29 was, again, the group alleged, I think to a certain point has been proved, but they were essentially interfered with the 2016 elections, if you remember. But there we are, Russian malicious cyber activity. It sort of lists out what they did right over here in terms of the operation. So the adversary space, neutral space, the victim space. This is the alternate names. So indicators of compromise. Let's see. They have the mitigations here. This is not detailed enough. I want one that actually dives into one of their campaigns here. Actually, it might be wise to go into the campaigns. Let's see Operation Ghost. We can see the techniques implemented here. Do we have any? Nothing there. Let's go back. I just want to, let's go to the SolarWinds compromise. Let's see. Actually, it might be wise to go back in here. So they bypassed UAC, bypass user account control, APT29. Yeah, that was the original one. Let's take a look at maybe APT37 or one of the references here, just so I can show you why this is useful for, there we are. So, you know, if you, this is a great thing for you to do as a red team or a pen test, or if you are on the offensive side of cybersecurity, because it'll actually give you, it'll actually teach you different ways or different implementations of a particular technique. So it actually teaches you, you know, what the best of the best in terms of APT groups are using, let's say to bypass UAC, and then you know, you can use that to improve your skill set. Or your tradecraft. So you can see in this case, initial dropper, the UAC bypass method was UAC me. That was the exploit used. By the way, I've made a video on UAC me. You can actually take a look at it. It was a again, a tool allows you to bypass UAC through different techniques. But here you can see, let's take a little bit, not the victimology. Hold on, let me take a look at this here. There we are, multi-stage binary infection. We can see one of the most notable functions of the initial dropper is to bypass Windows UAC, user account control, in order to execute the next payload with higher privileges. This malware uses the public privilege escalation exploit code CVE 2018-8120 or UAC me, which is normally used by legitimate red teams. Aha! So I'm actually being vindicated here. In any case, I went on a serious tangent there. My apologies. So that probably gave you, you know, a very good introduction as to how you can use it as a red teamer. But one thing I want to touch on is the matrices. So you can see you have the enterprise matrix where you can now filter based on, you know, the operating systems or the environment you're going to be targeting. So if I was targeting a cloud environment, you can now see that the TTPs are far fewer than what we had when we just clicked on, you know, the enterprise top level matrix. By the way, if I click on Windows, it'll now limit the TTPs just to Windows, right? And that means that all of these techniques or sub techniques are relevant to just the Windows operating system. So you can see, you can go through that there. If we go to defense evasion, it'll now only display bypass user account control and no Linux techniques or sub techniques. The pre-matrix is very cool because it essentially encapsulates reconnaissance and resource development. So resource development is the process of, again, acquiring infrastructure for your red team operation, or what attackers or APT groups typically do before they begin any operation. They typically buy domains, you know, DNS servers. They set up the infrastructure, right? Or they can compromise infrastructure that they can then use to, you know, as a way to, so they'll typically, I'll give you an example, they'll typically compromise like websites or, you know, small companies, organizations that, again, don't have any, they're not really security aware or conscious, and so they'll not be able to tell that the website has been compromised. And by the way, the attackers will not do anything on the website like deface it. They'll just leave it running as normal, but will use it to either route traffic or will, again, try and convert the server to act as something like a proxy or a redirector for their C2 communication, so on and so forth. And you can see reconnaissance is already, you already should be aware of it if you're a pen tester. But you also have, you know, the matrix for macOS, likewise for containers. If you're targeting, you know, containerized environments, or you're dealing with DevOps environment, don't tell anyone you heard that from me. But you also have TTPs for mobile environments. So you can see that we have abuse elevation control mechanism here. It looks like, in this case, you know, device process injection, ptrace system calls. I believe this is this works on both Android and iOS, but you get the idea. So that's what the matrix, the various matrices represent. They just allow you to limit the TTPs to the environment that you're targeting or that you want TTPs for. You can see for the ICS environment or industrial control systems environments, they're also going to be very different because you're dealing with different operating systems now. And for example, you can see the tactic inhibit response function. You have stuff like activating the firmware update mode, or what attackers have typically done, like suppressing alarms, so on and so forth. Anyway, so that's the matrices, and you know, we've talked about TTPs, but one thing I want to highlight here, we go back to that example, and I'm using it because, again, it makes sense. You can see that every technique or sub-technique has its own unique ID, and the sub-techniques have the same parent ID, but then have a suffix, a sequential suffix here. So you can see the first sub-technique is 001, second one is T1548002, so on and so forth. It then tells you the platforms that the technique is applicable to. So in this case, Azure AD, Google Workspace, Infrastructure as a Service, Linux, Office 365, Windows, macOS, and then more importantly, the permissions required in order for you to execute this technique successfully. So you need to have administrator or user privileges here, depending on, you know, what technique or sub-technique you're trying to implement or you're trying to execute. And when this was last, when it was created and when it was last modified. So for the defensive, if you're a blue teamer, you have your mitigations here. So if I wanted to mitigate this, what could I do? Well, I could check for common UAC bypass weaknesses on the Windows systems to be aware of the risk posture and address issues where appropriate, or I can, if we take a look at the Windows sub-technique, bypass user account control, the mitigations are going to be much better. So, for example, you can see mitigations here, remove users from the local administrator group on system. So really, really useful stuff. So if I told a blue team that, hey, you guys really did not detect this or detect this particular sub-technique ID, then they can always refer to the mitigations and detection, the detections here. So for example, if you wanted to detect this type of activity, you can take a look at, you know, for example, process creation, the data source being process creation, and you can monitor newly executed processes such as eventviewer.exe and sdclt.exe that may bypass UAC mechanisms to elevate processes or process privileges on the systems. Threat actors often, after compromising a machine, try to disable UAC to elevate their privileges, and this is done by changing the registry key for the system policies using reg.exe, and you can then see, you know, the various analytics here. But yeah, so that pretty much is what I wanted to explain for now. Now, this video will be improved upon or will make a lot more sense in the next video, and we'll be taking a look at another tool, again, still under the MITRE ATT&CK framework, called the Attack Navigator. So with that being said, that's going to be it for this video. And as based on what I said in the previous video, you can find the blog post outlining everything that we've covered in this video the forum post in the description section, as well as the first pinned comment in the comment section. If you like this video or you found value in it, please leave a like down below. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave them in the comment section down below. Furthermore, you can continue the discussion with me regarding this series and any other videos you may want me to cover on the HackerSploit forum, which is accessible on forum or via forum.hackersploit.org. And as I said, the link to this particular video's post on the forum is added in the description section, and the first pinned comment in the comment section, or rather the pinned comment in the comment section. But that being said, that's going to be it for this video, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.